Well, there's microphones, right? So there are two microphones at the front of the room. So if you'd like to ask a question, please approach one or the other, and feel free to get in line, and feel free to introduce yourself if so inclined. Yes, sir.
I'm not bashful, I guess. I just got a quick question on your thoughts on the supermajority that's basically overcome the Senate with the filibuster. How do we get out of this 60 vote, pardon my French, bullshit, when there's a majority that should be able to pass bills, and therefore I think would allow the progressives to tell Lieberman to
Go Cheney himself.
Yeah, exactly.
How many of you remember which article of the Constitution the filibuster is in? Right. It's in the Bible, right? They just throw the damn thing out next week. 50 of them. Throw it out. That's it. That's how you get rid of the filibuster. Now, how we get them to do it is a whole other story. It's the same question as how we get them to do anything. But a first step would be making clear to them that we're onto them, that we know it's a bogus excuse, that we know that it's just a rule that the Senate makes its own rules, that it's a rule that didn't used to be there, a rule they've changed many times, and they've changed it with 50 senators. And if they didn't want it to be there, it wouldn't be. It is minority rule. It is 41 senators, in the worst case scenario, representing 11% of Americans, blocking all legislation by both houses. There's nothing more anti-democratic, other than perhaps the Supreme Court, in our system of government. And there's no excuse for it. Now, I think that amending the Constitution to get rid of the Senate, which has never done anyone an ounce of good, would be the ideal solution. But if you're going to have the Senate sitting there, taking up space, eating up money, wasting our time, and making our bills worse, it would make them less worse if we got rid of the filibuster. Now, one way you do it is you get several Republicans to commit that they would help get rid of the filibuster with the Democrats when the Republicans have the majority. Then the Democrats maybe want to get rid of it now. But I think convincing them, and somehow through our own systems of communication and the independent media and books, communicating to the nation that we're onto them has got to be the first step. Because they love it, not just because they're afraid to get rid of it, not just because they want to be anti-democratic when they are back in the minority, thereby guaranteeing that they will be back in the minority because they fail to do anything. But also, I think because they love the excuse, right? If they could just get one Republican onto a bill and call it bipartisan, then the Democrats couldn't be blamed for how awful the bill is. And if they have to get 60, you know, it's a bigger fight for them. We should make clear to them immediately that we know they are choosing to pass bad legislation. It's a choice they're making, and they could throw out the filibuster rule tomorrow. And they damn well should. Yes?
Hi. I really admire that you're actually speaking out about the war crimes that Obama is starting to be so, I mean, he's a war criminal just like Bush. He hasn't done as much, and the whole thing with the Palestinians a year ago. And unfortunately, so many good people in this country have not been speaking out at all about what's been going on with Obama and that his complicit, you know, what he's doing is crimes. And I just wonder if you are willing to talk to people beyond going along and pressuring the Democrats, which have shown that they're totally part of the system themselves. And people have spent way, way too much time waiting for the Democrats to do something, and I could go on and on. Nancy Pelosi saying she's not going to impeach, and yes, they should all be impeached still and tried for war crimes. What do you think about actually breaking people from spending all their energy trying to pressure the Congress and actually getting out in the streets and raising holy hell and saying we're not going to go along with this stuff and we refuse to be complicit and actually building a whole independent movement? Not that, I mean, I'm not saying, you know, certainly people are going to be doing both, but what do you think about people breaking people away from this deadly road at this point?
I think it's a bad idea, with all due respect, based on a worldview that I'm sympathetic with, but that I don't quite share. And that is, if I were convinced there was no possible hope ever for this system of government, and it was going to have to be totally abolished before we could do any good for anybody, then I would be able, I think, to grasp this distinction that comes up quite frequently between pressuring Congress and somehow mobilizing people in the middle of nowhere to demand better things, but not of Congress, just of the universe. Because, you know, I'm 1000% for educating people, mobilizing people, informing people, building a grassroots movement across the country. But to what end? Well, to demand that our government represent us, and to do so without any concern for politeness or without any naivete about how easy it's going to be, with a willingness to go to jail and enjoy it. But this distinction between pressuring Congress, which is somehow to naively buy into the idea that the system is good for us, and denouncing Obama in a town square as true populism, is one that at that point I have to oppose, because it's not Obama's war. And if our anti-war activism only goes so far as to say Bush is fighting a bad war, Obama is fighting a bad war, we reinforce the idea that wars are up to presidents, and presidents can launch wars, and presidents can fight wars, and presidents can escalate wars. And they cannot, and we must not let that idea stand, and we have to get back to the idea that was put in our Constitution at the beginning, which is that only Congress can make wars, because we have no ability to get a president to not make wars. So by all means, report everything that's happening in Washington, urge people to break out of the prison of partisanship, and the idea that elected representatives should be on our team or the other team. No, they are all good and they are all bad. They all do good things that need to be rewarded and horrible things that need to be punished. They're not on our team. They're not our friend. They're not our enemy. They're our elected representatives who are, by and large, failing to represent us. Majority opinion is never represented in Washington. And we have to force it to be represented, and it will be very difficult, and it will take a great deal of honest, independent agitation. But to just do that in a parking lot somewhere and not direct it at Congress members, or to go protest at health insurance companies or weapons makers, but not in your Congress member's office, I think loses the key strategic direction we need. Yes, sir?
J. Glenn Evans, you know, we're not going to really make a change until we change the power. And both the Democrats and Republicans have proven themselves so hopelessly corrupt. When are we going to say enough and organize, to get everyone together and organize a people's party? That's the only way we're going to make change. You've got to change those in power. They won't change the election process to a term limit. I've been down to their office and we talked to them, and they still go ahead and do what they want to because they're in the hands of the lobbyists. And we're not going to change. They can change the law, but they won't do it. So we're going to have to change them. And get enough people, educate them, and wake them up. That's the only way we're going to make any change. That's my opinion. What is your take on it?
Well, I largely agree, and I have a book about it, but I think that, you know, one of the useful tools we have is the threat of electoral defeat in the next election or the next primary, and we have to use that. We have the threat of making their lives difficult, of disrupting their office, of making it hard to do their job. We have the threat of bad publicity, of negative attention. We have to use every useful, constructive, nonviolent approach we can to make their lives miserable until they listen to us and stop committing crimes, including war crimes. Now, if you want to pursue an electoral strategy, one approach can involve building new parties. And there are, of course, nations in Europe and elsewhere that have more than 2 parties, that have much better representation and much better policies, although the multiplicity of parties is only one of many differences, and maybe the least of many differences. But I think whether you want independent candidates who, whether they belong to any party or not, can ignore party leaders and listen to their constituents, or whether you want representatives of a particular new party that you're building, you still need the same reforms. You need ballots open to candidates without these crazy ballot access limitations. You need media open to candidates. You need debates open to candidates. You need to take away the power of money that the 2 parties have. You need all the same kinds of reforms. So I don't know whether I don't know whether a 3rd party or a 4th party is going to make a big difference or not. But the reforms that would make such a party possible are absolutely, essentially required, and we immediately need, whether it takes the form of a party or a PAC or a for-profit company, we need independent organizations for change that are answerable in a democratic, with a small d way, to us. Because right now we have labor unions and activist groups that for the most part take their orders from the very people they are pretending to lobby, which reverses the process and makes us props rather than the setters of the agenda. So we need a lot of things. And I would encourage you to pursue the ones you're interested in building.
Just remember the Republicans were a minority party back in Lincoln's time, just before that. So we're going to have to say enough of it, and enough people do it, and let's make a change. Because we're going to change the power. That's the only will to do it.
The Republicans, thank you. The Republicans are a small minority party right now, as a matter of fact, and the craziest supporters of the Republican Party that dominate our televisions quite often are a small minority within the Republican Party. So, you know, start by turning off your televisions. If nobody else has any questions whatsoever, I guess people are standing 10 feet back, so I don't see you. Please, step forward.
You just pretty much answered everything I wanted to ask. So.
Okay.
I just wanted to point out that we pay our representatives, we pay our congressmen, we pay our senators to vote to represent us. But so often they're not present for votes. And how do we make them, well, we have to figure out a way to make them accountable. It makes me crazy. Because in this age of technology, there ought to be a way where they can vote remotely. Am I right? Of course, you know, there's a concern about integrity if it were online or something, but that's what frustrates me. We pay them to represent us, but then a lot of the time they're in their districts campaigning, so they're not present for votes. That's my only comment.
Well, I agree that they are shamefully misrepresenting and lazy, but also misdirected. They're spending a lot of time begging for money, which they shouldn't be doing. They should be spending time legislating. And they're committed to voting on the big things that the corporate media will pay attention to, and to voting on the big things that their party leaders demand that they vote on, and to voting the way that their party leaders demand that they vote. So they don't have to put in the time listening to us or educating themselves, or working on the legislation. They can do what their party leaders tell them. They can go out and raise money, and they can work as a PR campaign to get themselves reelected, which they almost always do, which is something that disturbs the far-right members of the Republican Party and those further right and those all the way over to the left. We are all outraged. We ought to be able to all, there were 90% of us with Bill against the Paulson plan. There are 90% of us against the misrepresentation and the inability to unelect these people. Whether we should have them vote remotely, I don't know. I mean, how many of them would just let Lockheed Martin do it for them? How many of them would it be even harder to find them and confront them in person if they weren't in Washington and they weren't in their district?
Argentina?
Yeah, if they were in Argentina or the Appalachian Trail. I don't know whether they should. Certainly the technology exists, there's no question. Should they be able to do that? I'm not sure, because I kind of like them to be either in Washington or in their districts, but someplace where we know where they are and we can get to them and tell them what we think. But maybe if they had to be in their districts, they couldn't just be anywhere. Maybe it would be a good idea, but join the Backbone campaign if you haven't, and thank and spank them. Thank them for the good things and spank them for the bad things, and make it difficult for them to do the wrong thing. Get them on video, put it on YouTube, go to their public events and confront them and challenge them. Go to their offices, go to their homes. I mean, this is past the point where politeness is the highest value. They are killing people. So do what you can.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes?
Thank you, Town Hall, for a great platform. Thank you, John Moyer, for being a citizen hero. And David, thanks for your integrity and the risk you take to speak out like this. My question is around, I don't know if this ties in or not, but the Council on Foreign Relations. There was a speaker that came to Town Hall about 6 months ago. He wrote a book, something about ideas, and I did a little research on it. He's a well-known media guy, and he's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And that the Council represents a group of the most powerful leaders in the world from every sphere of influence, politics, science. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And I'm curious about what your comments are on how we can be our own council, people who are behind the Constitution, to speak against this loss of totalitarian government and just the rule of the wealth and whatnot.
6 minutes. 6 minutes and 6 questions. Join the Backbone campaign, which has a progressive cabinet, a cabinet of secretaries who actually would represent our views in departments in Washington. Make better media. The next peace or justice group that buys a full-page ad in the New York Times and brags about it to me should simply be shut down. I mean, you don't fund a newspaper without which we wouldn't have these wars in order to promote peace. We have to support the good media outlets. There are good websites, there are good radio shows, there are good television programs here locally that don't reach enough people, but would if they had more support.
Brad blog.
So, we at some point have to give up on some media and build better, and it's something that individuals can do at any time. So we need a better communication system. We are far better informed. We are often the majority, and we think we're this little minority because we're not in the media. We have to have better communications. Thank you.
Two things. One, speaking of undemocratic, it seems to me that the Federal Reserve is one of the least democratic of our major institutions. And I wonder if you could speak about, number one, auditing the Fed, number two, the possibilities for nationalizing the Fed, bringing it back under Treasury. The second issue is there seems to be a lot of momentum gaining right now and a lot of energy around people moving their money out of the large financial institutions into local banks and credit unions. I'm reading tons of that on the blogs and having conversations with friends all over the place. Some of us have even been talking about lobbying our state legislators about establishing a state bank to move out of the big international corporations down into something that will benefit our state and our local communities. I wonder if you can speak about that as well.
I completely agree with all of that and encourage it, and thank you for the correction. Yes, the Federal Reserve is even less democratic with a small d than the Senate or the Supreme Court. It is no more federal than the Federal Express, as Congressman I used to work for named Dennis Kucinich has said sometimes. And I think it's a very interesting situation where you have a huge majority of members of the House co-sponsoring a bill, right? Usually you have 20, 30, 40 co-sponsors, you have hearings, you get a floor vote, you pass a bill. Here you have well over a majority co-sponsoring the thing, bipartisan support. This is a bill not to have Congress control raising and spending and regulating money as the Constitution requires, but just to let Congress see what these guys are doing with our money. This is the bill to audit the Fed. If they would just have a vote, it's already passed. You already have well over a majority, and it's not yet been brought for a vote. So it's something very useful to push for. And if you have Congress members who don't listen to you on anything else, they might listen to you on this one. Most of them are for it, at least in theory, but which of them will push the leadership to actually make it happen? Yes?
I wanted to ask you about racketeering. I'm here in Seattle, in Washington State, as all over the country. We've paid out tremendous amounts of money for war, which profits large corporations. Here in Washington State, we paid over $21 billion in tax dollars for war, and here in Seattle, just the city itself, people have paid out of their tax dollars over $2 billion for war. And I'm wondering if it's worthwhile to go after profiteers of war with RICO laws, with racketeering, regarding racketeering. It's not just Smedley Butler who knows that war is a racket. But what are the possibilities of going after war profiteers and their friends in government with RICO laws?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I think it would be extremely difficult, but I think it might be worth pursuing, and I think certainly will ask some interested lawyers that I know what they think of it. But there are certainly many ways we could go after war profiteers, and there are ways that they could be held accountable and discouraged, and therefore war is discouraged. But it's going up against the funders of campaigns, and it's going up against these people who advertise their creation of jobs in the district. Even though we all know and all the studies show that putting our money into peaceful industries would create more jobs, so we're actually creating fewer jobs. We're actually hurting the economy by putting our money into these things. People are not trained to think of it in that way. I think what Congresswoman McCollum did introducing the Acorn Act was appropriate when all of these Congress members were going after my former employer, Acorn, and suggesting that it should be defunded because someone had alleged it had done something wrong. Congresswoman McCollum introduced the Against Corporations Organizing to Rip Off the Nation Act, which said we will defund any government contractors who've been convicted of major felonies. And of course, Acorn wouldn't make the list, and even if it did, it never got, but 1,000th of what any of these major companies got. But war profiteers, companies selling weapons to national enemies, exposing troops to nuclear radiation, a laundry list of outrageous, colorful crimes and abuses. There are war profiteers who could be eliminated as war profiteers with minimal standards if we could legislate that, but that requires legislation, and in some cases we can go through the courts more easily. I hope that becomes possible. The recent decision to let the Blackwater killers off had some interesting results in that the Iraqis may try them in Iraq, they may pursue damages here in this country, and they've started talking again in the parliament in Iraq about a public vote on the occupation, which of course they were promised by last July and haven't had. So there are, as with Padilla's case against you, there are cases making progress in the courts. So if this was another strategy that would work, it would be terrific.
Yeah, well, it's time for our members of Congress to stop allowing the federal government to rob us. And we're all hurting here in Washington State and in Seattle, and every pothole is a cost of war. Every child who's hungry. So I think that's a major project ahead of us.
I hope so. Glad to hear it.
For your last question of the night, I'll make it yes or no, which may be difficult. The most recent proposed constitutional amendment proposes term limits for members of Congress. Is this a way, or the most beneficial way, to cleanse Congress, or is it going to be ultimately detrimental to the way our system works?
Well, I think it's a cheap fix. Well, you asked me both sides. No, it's not. It's not going to fix everything, even if we could so amend the Constitution, which would be very, very difficult. And what I've seen of what it's done at the state level has not had the huge beneficial results that we might hope for. It's become so bad that we think our representatives would be better off if they could just ignore us. So we think if they're not thinking about the next election, then they'll do better, right? That's how bad things have gotten. But that's a perverse, anti-democratic attitude. We ought to want them to be thinking about nothing other than the next election and how to please us, their constituents. And we ought to be able, in that election, to unelect their sorry behinds. And if we're going to do that, it's going to mean public financing, free media, verifiable elections, reduction of the dominance of the parties, and so forth. But if we had those reforms, then we wouldn't think of the public as yet another corrupting factor. We would get back to thinking of the public as the heart and soul of democratic representation. We want them to be worried about the next election.
David's heading over to the table. There's stacks of books for you to buy and for him to sign. Let's say thank you to